The last voicemail from a missing woman reveals what happened 22 years later. It was the dust that haunted him most. Not the thick, settled blankets of it that coated the forgotten furniture, but the motes. The tiny dancing particles that caught the slivers of sunlight piercing the boarded-up windows of the old farmhouse. They were alive, a swirling galaxy of what was, and to Detective Miles Corbin, they felt like the last remnants of her. Of Alara, each speck a microscopic piece of skin, a fiber from her favorite blue sweater, a fragment of a laugh that had dissolved into the air 22 years ago. He ran a gloved finger along the top of a warped wooden dresser, the surface sticky. With the grime of 2 decades, the silence in the house was a physical weight, pressing in on him, punctuated only by the frantic thumping of his own heart and the creak of a floorboard upstairs. Protesting the presence of the living. 22 years, a lifetime. He'd been a rookie then, barely old enough to buy a drink, his uniform still stiff with newness. The Alara Vance case had been his first real taste of the abyss. A 28-year-old woman, a vibrant artist who painted canvases with colors so fierce they seemed to bleed off the edges, had vanished from this very house. No signs of a struggle, no ransom note, no body. Just a half-finished painting on an easel, a pot of tea gone cold on the stove, and a silence that had screamed louder than any cry for help. The case had consumed him, then broken him. It was the ghost that sat at his dinner table, the whisper in the static of his radio on lonely night shifts. It had cost him his marriage, his peace of mind, and had carved lines into his face that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with a failure he could never outrun. Now, at 52, with a retirement plaque gathering its own dust on his desk, he was back. An anonymous tip, a single typed sentence slipped under the station door, had led them here. The answer is in the walls. Vague, cryptic, probably a cruel prank from some local kid who'd grown up on the ghost story of the missing artist. But Miles couldn't ignore it. He owed her that much. His younger partner, Detective Harding, a kid with an annoyingly optimistic face and a penchant for protein bars, was documenting the scene with a digital camera, its clinical flashes momentarily banishing the shadows. "Anything, Miles?" Harding called out, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "Just ghosts, kid," Miles muttered, his gaze sweeping the room. The air was thick with the smell of decay, of damp plaster and rotting wood, but underneath it all, faint and impossibly persistent, was the scent of turpentine. Her scent? It was a punch to the gut, a memory so sharp it felt like a fresh wound. He remembered the smell clinging to her clothes when he'd interviewed her friends, her family, all those years ago. They'd all said the same thing. Alara was a force of nature, a whirlwind of passion and paint. She was also fiercely private, especially about her work and her love life. She'd been involved with someone, they knew that much. Someone powerful, someone older. Someone no one had ever met. The floorboards upstairs groaned again. This time, a long, mournful sigh. Harding froze, his camera held aloft. "Did you hear that?" "House is settling," Miles said, though the hair on his arms stood on end. This house didn't settle. It held its breath. He moved from the living room into the small, cramped kitchen. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August 2003. A faded picture of a sunflower was tacked. Above the dates, on the 14th, a single word was circled in red ink: finale. That was the day she disappeared. The day the finale came for her. The tip said in the walls. Harding said, joining him, his voice a respectful whisper now. "You think it's literal, like a body?" "God, I hope not," Miles breathed. The thought of finding her like that, after all this time. It was a horror he wasn't sure he could face. He ran his hand along the plaster, feeling for inconsistencies, for the telltale sign of repair. The walls were cold, solid, nothing. He moved back into the living room, his eyes scanning every inch. His gaze landed on the fireplace, a monstrous thing of riverstone and dark mortar. It dominated the room, a black moor that hadn't seen a fire in decades. and beside it, a section of the wall that seemed different. The wallpaper, a pattern of faded roses, was slightly bubbled, almost imperceptibly so. A faint, straight line ran from the ceiling to the floor, hidden within the floral design. "Harding, give me a hand," Miles said, his voice tight. Together, they pushed against the wall. It didn't budge. Miles pulled out his maglite and traced the faint line. It wasn't a crack, it was a seam. He took out his pocket knife and carefully, painstakingly, began to pick at the edge of the wallpaper. It peeled away with a dry, brittle sound, revealing not plaster, but wood. A door. A hidden door, papered over to blend seamlessly with the wall. A jolt of adrenaline, cold and sharp, shot through Miles. This was it. After 22 years, this was it. Harding let out a low whistle. I'll be damned. There was no handle, no knob, just the faint outline. Miles pressed his shoulder against it and pushed. The wood groaned, scraped, and then gave way with a shudder that sent a fresh shower of dust motes into the air. It opened into a narrow, dark space. Not a room, but a cavity within the walls, barely wide enough for a man to stand in. The air that rushed out was stale, cold, and carried a new smell. Something metallic, something cloying. Miles shone his light inside. The narrow space was empty, save for a small dust-covered object on the floor. It was an old cell phone, a Nokia, one of those indestructible bricks from the early 2000s. It was attached to a charger, which was plugged into a cleverly hidden electrical outlet. Even after all this time, a faint green light glowed on the charger. It had been powered for 22 years. Harding reached for it, but Miles stopped him. "Bag it carefully." As Harding worked, Miles stared into the dark void. Why? Why hide a phone in the wall? Why keep it charged? It made no sense. He felt a creeping dread, a sense that he was standing on the edge of a precipice, and the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. Back at the station, the forensics team worked their magic. The phone, miraculously, still had a charge. The SIM card was intact. The moment of truth felt strangely anticlimactic. A group of tired cops huddled around a small plastic relic in a sterile lab. The tech, a young woman with purple hair and a look of intense concentration, navigated the phone's primitive menu. "Okay. Call logs are empty. Messages are wiped. All of them." A collective sigh of disappointment filled the room. Miles felt the familiar sting of failure. Of course, it couldn't be that easy. "Wait," the tech said, her eyes widening. "There's one thing. A single voicemail. It's from the day she went missing. August 14th, 2003. Timed at 11:58 p.m. The room went silent. Miles's blood ran cold. He could feel every one of the 22 years pressing down on him. This was the voice from the grave. The last words of Alara Vance. "Can you play it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She nodded, connecting the phone to a speaker. A crackle of static filled the air, a sound from a forgotten era, and then, a voice. It was a whisper, ragged and terrified, a sound so broken it barely sounded human. It was "Can't believe you did this," she sobbed, her words punctuated by a sharp intake of breath. "He's watching me. He's always watching. I thought you were different. I thought you were saving me." There was a sound in the background, a low rhythmic thud, 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 thud. "Oh God, he's coming. He found me. I'm in the wall. I'm in the wall, but he knows. He always knows. Don't let him. Don't let him win." The painting, the finale. It's not what you think. It's not for the gallery. It's for him. It's a map. It's a map to where he buries his secrets. The old quarry, the one he owns. He said the water keeps everything clean. He said no one would ever find them. He called them his fallen angels. Her voice broke into a desperate gasping cry. "My name is Alara Vance, and I'm not the only one." The rhythmic thudding grew louder, closer. Then came another sound. A man's voice, calm, cold, and dripping with a chilling authority. It was a voice Miles knew. A voice that had been a pillar of the community for decades. A voice that had offered condolences to Ilara's grieving family on the nightly news. Did you really think a wall could stop me, my dear? The voice said, followed by a soft, almost gentle laugh. There are no walls high enough, no holes deep enough. This is my world. We just let you live in it. A scream, sharp and final, ripped through the speaker, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. It was cut short by a sickening crunch, a sound of bone and cartilage giving way. Then, silence. Only the static remained, hissing like a snake in the sudden, suffocating quiet of the lab. Miles stumbled back, his hand flying to his mouth. The world tilted on its axis. The voice, he knew that voice better than his own. It was the voice of Judge Alistair Finch, the man who had presided over the initial, fruitless investigation into Elara's disappearance. The man who had personally signed the order to have her declared legally dead 7 years later. The man who was, even now, one of the most powerful and respected figures in the state. And in that moment, the dust motes in the old farmhouse no longer felt like the remnants of one lost woman. They felt like the ashes of an entire world built on lies, a world that was about to burn to the ground. The cliffhanger wasn't just about what happened to Elara. It was about the monster who had been hiding in plain sight. A monster who wore a judge's robes and held the power of life and death in his hands. And Miles Corbin, the broken-down detective on the verge of retirement, was the only one who had heard his confession. The finale was just beginning. The silence in the forensics lab was absolute. A vacuum where sound and reason had ceased to exist. Harding was pale, his youthful optimism shattered, his eyes wide with a horror that mirrored Miles's own. The tech with the purple hair had her hands clamped over her mouth, her knuckles white. The voicemail had been more than a clue. It had been a desecration, a violation that had reached across 2 decades to poison the very air they breathed. Miles felt a tremor in his hands, a deep, cellular vibration of rage and nausea. Alistair Finch, the name echoed in the hollows of his mind. A name synonymous with integrity, with justice, with the unshakable bedrock of their small city's moral compass. It was like discovering that the church crucifix was carved from the bones of the damned. Miles finally found his voice, a ragged tear in the fabric of the silence. Play it again. The tech flinched, but she obeyed. The static hissed. The terrified whisper of Elara Vance filled the room once more, each word a fresh stab of guilt. A map to where he buries his secrets. The calm, chilling baritone of Judge Finch. My fallen angels. The final aborted scream. The sickening crunch. Miles listened, forcing himself to absorb every nuance. Every terrified breath. Every drop of casual cruelty in Finch's tone. This wasn't just a confession. It was a boast. He had spent 22 years mourning a ghost, a victim of a faceless crime. Now the ghost had a name, and the monster had a face. It was the face he'd seen at charity galas, at ribbon-cutting ceremonies. The face that smiled benevolently from campaign posters every election cycle. The injustice of it was a physical force, a pressure building behind his ribs, threatening to crack him open. He thought of Elara's parents, a gentle, heartbroken couple who had withered away in the years after her disappearance, dying without ever knowing what had happened to their only child. He had sat in their floral-patterned living room, drinking their weak tea, and promised them he would never give up. He had failed them. He had failed Elara, and all the while, the man responsible had been sitting on a raised dais, draped in black robes, passing judgment on lesser men. The quarry, Miles said, the words tasting like ash. Finch Industries owns the old granite quarry just west of town. They shut it down years ago. Harding looked at him, a new, hard light in his eyes. The kid was gone, replaced by a cop. He said them. Fallen angels, plural. I'm not the only one, she said. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. This wasn't just about Elara. This was a graveyard. The drive out to the quarry was a blur. Miles's mind was a maelstrom of images. Elara's vibrant, desperate paintings. The cold, empty farmhouse. The smiling public face of Judge Alistair Finch. Power imbalance. The words from the voicemail echoed in his head. A 28-year-old artist and a powerful judge, decades her senior. What kind of relationship had that been? A secret affair? Or something darker? The way he'd spoken to her on that recording. My dear, it was possessive, patronizing, the tone of a collector speaking of a prized, but ultimately disposable object. The quarry was a gaping wound in the earth, a sheer drop of hundreds of feet to a pool of unnaturally turquoise water. A chain-link fence, rusted and sagging, was the only thing separating the access road from the abyss. A faded nitrogen monoxide trespassing sign, peppered with shotgun pellets, hung crookedly from a post. It was a place of endings. A place where things went to be forgotten. We need a warrant, Harding said, stating the obvious. And a dive team. And we need to do it quietly. If Finch gets wind of this, he'll bury it, Miles finished. Along with US, the full weight of what they were up against settled on him. They had a 22-year-old voicemail from a dead woman's phone, found in a hidden compartment. It was explosive, yes, but Finch was more than a man. He was an institution. He had friends in high places, judges he'd appointed, a police chief he'd played golf with. To go after him was to go after the entire system. They would be crushed. The painting, Miles said suddenly, his mind latching onto the one piece of physical evidence they might have. She said it was a map. The finale. The station auctioned off the contents of the house years ago, after she was declared dead, Harding said, his face grim. Her paintings, her furniture, it's all scattered to the winds. Another dead end, another failure. The frustration was a hot, metallic taste in the back of his throat. He stared down at the placid, turquoise water, and for a moment, he felt a terrifying urge to simply let it all go. To let the quarry keep its secrets. It was too big, too dangerous. He was too old, too tired. But then he heard her scream again, that final, desperate sound, and the rage returned, a cleansing fire. No, he said, his voice hard as granite. We find that painting. I don't care what it takes. We tear this city apart piece by piece, until we find it, and then we go to the DA, not the chief, not the captain. We go straight to the state district attorney, someone Finch can't control. He looked at Harding, whose face was set with a grim determination that made him look 10 years older. This is it, kid. You walk away now. No one blames you. You come with me. You're putting your career, maybe your life, on the line. Harding didn't hesitate. He just nodded. Where do we start? The cliffhanger wasn't a question of guilt anymore. The voicemail had answered that. The cliffhanger was a question of war. It was two lone detectives against a king, with a 22-year-old ghost as their only guide, and as the sun began to set, casting long, bloody-looking shadows across the quarry's edge, Miles Corbin felt a chilling certainty. The finale was indeed coming. But it wouldn't be in a gallery. It would be in a courtroom, or a grave. Alara Vance was not born to be a ghost. She was born of fire and turpentine. A creature of chaotic energy and brutal talent. To understand the victim, you had to understand the inferno that had raged within her. She had grown up in a house of beige walls and hushed tones, the only child of two mild-mannered accountants, who loved her dearly but understood her not at all. They saw her passion as a phase, her art as a hobby. They wanted her to be safe, to be sensible. Alara wanted to burn. She fled their quiet suburban existence for the ramshackle farmhouse on the edge of town. A place with good light, and no neighbors to complain about the loud music or the chemical smell of her paints. It was there she came alive. Her canvases were enormous, violent clashes of color and texture. She attacked them, not with brushes, but with palette knives, her own hands. Anything that could smear and gouge and build. Her subjects were raw, unflinching. The gnarled hands of an old farmer. The haunted eyes of a runaway teenager she'd let sleep on her couch. The twisted skeletal forms of dead trees against a bruised purple sky. There was a desperate, almost savage honesty to her work. It was the art of someone who saw the world without its skin on. But beneath the fierce independence was a wound. A deep, festering loneliness that her art could document but never heal. Her relationships were like her paintings, intense, messy, and short-lived. She threw herself into them with the same reckless abandon, and when they ended, the heartbreak was just another color to add to her palette. She craved a connection that was as powerful and all-consuming as her own creative drive. She yearned for a patron, not just of her art, but of her soul, someone who could see the fire and not be afraid of being burned. She met Judge Alastair Finch at a small local art show, where one of her less confrontational pieces, a landscape of a sun-drenched field, was on display. He was not what she expected. He was older, yes, in his late 50s, with a mane of silver hair and eyes the color of a winter sky. But he didn't talk to her about the weather or the local sports team. He talked to her about Goya's black paintings, about the sublime terror in a Turner seascape. He saw the darkness in her sunny landscape, the hint of a storm gathering. Just beyond the horizon, he saw her. "You paint with your nerve endings, don't you, Miss Vance?" he'd said, his voice a low, hypnotic rumble. "It's a rare and dangerous gift." She was captivated. He was everything she secretly craved: power, intellect, an appreciation for the shadows. He became her patron, buying her paintings for exorbitant sums, providing her with the finest materials. But the patronage came with a price: secrecy. "My position," he'd explained, his hand resting on her arm, a gesture that was both reassuring and proprietary. "It requires a certain discretion. The world is a small-minded place. They wouldn't understand a friendship like ours." Elara, who had spent her life feeling misunderstood, readily agreed. Their relationship unfolded in the shadows, in late-night visits to her farmhouse, in clandestine meetings in out-of-the-way diners. He was her mentor, her confidant, her critic. He pushed her, challenged her, demanding more from her art. "Show me the real darkness, Elara," he would urge. "Show me the things people are afraid to look at." He was also her lover. The affair was intoxicating, a dangerous secret that fueled her work. She was painting for an audience of one, and his approval was the only thing that mattered. The power imbalance was part of the thrill. He was a god, and she was his chosen muse. The antagonist, Judge Alastair Finch, was a man carved from marble and secrets. Publicly, he was a monument of civic virtue. He'd come from old money, his family's name etched onto the cornerstones of half the buildings in the city. He'd attended the best schools, joined the right clubs, and married the perfect, socially acceptable woman, a fragile, bird-like creature named Beatrice, who floated through life on a cloud of prescription medication and willful ignorance. Finch's courtroom was a theater of absolute control. His rulings were swift, decisive, and merciless. He spoke of the law as a sacred text, and of himself as its high priest. But the black robes concealed a rot that ran to the bone. Finch was a predator who craved not just power, but ownership. He collected things: rare books, antique clocks. People. He saw beauty only in things he could possess, and he saw Elara Vance as his greatest acquisition. She was wild, untamed, a masterpiece of raw emotion that he could shape and control. Her dependence on him, her secret adoration, it was a drug more potent than any power he wielded in the courtroom. He didn't love her. He curated her. His past was a carefully curated exhibit as well. There were whispers, of course. Rumors that had been smoothed over and forgotten. A young law clerk who had abruptly left her position and moved across the country. A witness in a high-profile case who had recanted her testimony after a private meeting with the judge. Beatrice's accidental fall down a flight of stairs years ago that had left her with a permanent limp and a haunted look in her eyes. Had a talent for making problems disappear. He moved through life with the serene confidence of a man who had never faced a consequence. He believed he was above the law, because in his world, he was the law. His cruelty was not born of anger, but of a profound and chilling sense of entitlement. The world was his personal collection, and he would not tolerate any of his pieces stepping out of line. The hidden witness was a man named Samuel Jones, though no one had called him that in 30 years. To the city, he was Sam the Junkman, a gaunt, twitchy figure who haunted the periphery of society. He ran the city's sprawling, chaotic junkyard, a place that sat conveniently adjacent to the Finch Quarry. Sam was a ghost, long before Elora became one. He was a veteran, a tunnel rat from a forgotten war, who had come home with his mind full of ghosts, and his nerves shot to hell. The loud noises, the open spaces, the crowds, they were torture. The junkyard was his sanctuary, a fortress of rusted metal and broken things where he could be alone with the rattling in his own head. Sam had a secret, a vantage point. From the highest hill of scrap metal, a teetering mountain of crushed cars and discarded appliances, he had a clear, unobstructed view of the quarry entrance. It was his ritual, his obsession. Every night, he would climb the scrap heap with a pair of military-grade binoculars and watch. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, he was just watching, bearing witness. It was the only thing that quieted the noise in his head. He had seen the judge's car many times. He'd seen it late at night, its expensive headlights cutting through the darkness, turning onto the private road that led to the quarry. He'd seen other cars too, over the years. Cars that would go in, but never come out. He didn't understand what he was seeing, not really. His mind, fractured by trauma, couldn't assemble the pieces into a coherent picture. He just knew. It was wrong. It was a secret that belonged to the powerful man, and Sam knew what happened to people who got in the way of powerful men. Fear was the bedrock of his existence. He had survived the tunnels by being invisible, by making no sound. He had survived the world by doing the same. On the night of August 14, 2003, Sam was on his perch. He saw the judge's sleek black sedan pull up to the quarry gate. He saw the passenger door open. He saw a woman with hair the color of fire get out of the car. She was fighting, struggling. Even from a distance, he could see the terror in her movements. He saw the judge, a silhouette of calm authority, pull her towards the edge. Sam's breath caught in his chest. The noise in his head became a roar. He wanted to scream, to do something, but the fear was a physical thing, a hand of ice closing around his throat. He was back in the tunnels, the darkness pressing in, the enemy all around him. He squeezed his eyes shut, his body trembling uncontrollably. When he opened them again, the woman was gone. The judge was standing alone at the edge of the quarry, a still, dark figure against the moonlight. He stood there for a long time, as if admiring his work. Then he got back in his car and drove away. Sam scrambled down from his scrap heap, his mind screaming. He had seen it. He had seen a murder, but who would believe him? Sam the junkman, the crazy vet who talked to himself. They would lock him up. The judge was a god in this city. To speak against him was blasphemy. So Sam did what he had always done. He buried it. He buried the memory deep inside, under layers of fear and scrap metal. But for 22 years, every time he closed his eyes, he saw a flash of red hair against the night sky, and then nothing. He was the hidden witness, the man who knew the truth but was too broken to speak it, his conscience, a festering wound that had never been allowed to heal. The secret was just another piece of junk in his yard, rusting, decaying, waiting for someone to finally dig it up. The escalation began subtly. A shift in the atmosphere between Ilara and the judge. The intoxicating thrill of their secret affair began to curdle into something suffocating. Finch's patronage became possession, his critiques of her work less about art and more about control. He started visiting the farmhouse unannounced, his arrivals marked by the crunch of gravel under the tires of his expensive car. A sound that once made her heart leap with excitement and now made it clench with dread. He would walk through her studio, his presence sucking the air out of the room, his gaze lingering on her canvases with a cold, appraising eye. "This is good, Elora," he said one afternoon. Standing before a new piece, a raw, chaotic swirl of black and crimson that felt like a scream trapped on canvas, but it's unfocused. Too much raw emotion, not enough discipline. He picked up one of her palette knives, its edge caked with dried paint, and held it up to the light. An artist, like a lawyer, must be precise. You must control the narrative. You are letting the paint control you. He turned to her, his winter sky eyes pinning her in place. I need you to be better than this." The words, meant to sound like encouragement, felt like a judgment, a dismissal. He was no longer her collaborator. He was her warden. He began to isolate her, subtly at first. He'd make casual, disparaging remarks about her friends, the few people she still saw from her old life. "Their children, Alara. They don't understand your potential. They hold you back." He discouraged her from entering her work in other shows, insisting that her talent was too special for public consumption, that it should be reserved for him alone. She was his secret, his prize, and he would not share. The betrayal that cut the deepest came when she discovered he was not her only patron. She had gone into the city to buy supplies, a rare trip she had not told him about. As she was leaving the art store, she saw him. He was across the street, sitting at a sidewalk cafe, his silver hair gleaming in the sun. He was leaning in close to a young woman, a girl, really, who couldn't have been more than 19. She was a dancer with the local ballet company, with wide, innocent eyes and a fragile, bird-like grace. The judge had his hand on her arm. The same proprietary gesture he always used with Alara. He was smiling. His voice a low hypnotic rumble, and Alara didn't need to hear the words to know their content. She was watching a rerun of her own seduction. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She wasn't his muse. She was just part of his collection. The latest acquisition, and she was already being replaced by a newer model. The humiliation was a hot acid shame that burned in her throat. She fled, her heart pounding, the city streets blurring through a haze of tears. The farmhouse, once her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. Her art became her only outlet. The canvases grew darker, more violent. She painted with a fury she had never known, channeling her rage and heartbreak into the work. She began painting the finale. It was her masterpiece, a massive trip that depicted a dark, powerful figure in robes, surrounded by falling, faceless forms, his fallen angels, and hidden within the chaotic strokes, in the abstract geography of the landscape, she began to paint her map. The lines of the quarry's edge, the specific curve of the access road, the cluster of 3 dead trees near the southern rim, was a confession in code, a message in a bottle she was preparing to throw into the world. It was her only weapon. The judge sensed the shift in her. He saw the defiance in her eyes, the new, dangerous edge to her work. He grew bolder, more cruel. The mask of the benevolent mentor slipped, revealing the cold, reptilian predator beneath. The psychological manipulation escalated into something more tangible. He would accidentally knock over a jar of turpentine, ruining a nearly finished painting. He would misplace her favorite palette knife. Small acts of sabotage, designed to undermine her confidence, to remind her of how much she needed him. One night, he arrived at the farmhouse, his mood darker than usual. He had been drinking. He found her working on the finale, her back to him, her body tense. He came up behind her, his presence a wave of cold menace. "What is this?" he asked, his voice soft, but laced with steel. "It's my new piece," she said, not turning around. "I call it the finale." "It's morbid," he said, his hand landing on her shoulder, his fingers digging in. Indulgent. He leaned in, his breath hot on her neck. "I think you need a break. You're becoming obsessed. Unhealthy." She tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "Let go of me, Alistair. Let go." He laughed, a short, ugly sound. "My dear Alara, I am the only thing holding you together. Without me, you are nothing. Just a sad, lonely girl splashing paint on a canvas in a rundown shack." His words were surgical, precise, aimed at her deepest insecurities. He humiliated her with the truth of her own loneliness, a truth he himself had manufactured. The fear, which had been a low hum in the background of her life, now became a constant, screaming siren. She knew she had to get out. She began making plans, secretly contacting a friend in another state, arranging to have her work shipped. She packed a small bag, hiding it in the back of her closet. She worked on the finale with a feverish intensity, knowing it was her only hope of exposing him. It was her testimony. Meanwhile, from his mountain of scrap, Sam the junkman watched. He saw the judge's car coming and going more frequently. He saw the lights on in the farmhouse at all hours of the night. He saw the woman with the red hair. But she looked different now. Her movements were frantic, her shoulders hunched. She looked like one of his fellow soldiers, haunted and hunted. He saw the judge grab her arm in the driveway one evening, her body going rigid. Sam felt a familiar, sickening lurch in his gut. He knew that look. It was the look of a trapped animal. The noise in his head grew louder, a chorus of whispers warning him to look away, to stay hidden, to not get involved. His fear was a physical barrier, a wall of static between him and the world. He was a witness trapped in his own private hell, his conscience and his terror locked in a brutal, escalating conflict. He was watching a woman walk towards a cliff edge, and he was paralyzed, unable to scream a warning. His silence, a form of complicity that was eating him alive. The injustice was happening right in front of him. A slow-motion murder he was powerless to stop. The final days were a blur of escalating tension and creeping dread. Alara knew her time was running out. The judge's visits became more frequent, his presence a constant, suffocating weight. He would sit in her studio for hours, not speaking, just watching her paint, his silence more menacing than any threat. He was a spider, and she could feel the strands of his web tightening around her. She had to finish the map, she had to get it out. She arranged for a small, independent shipping company, one she was sure Finch had no connection to pick up her paintings on the morning of August 15th. The finale would be among them, sent to her friend's address out of state. Her escape was planned. All she had to do was survive one more night. On the evening of the 14th, she put the final touches on the triptych. The map was there, hidden, in plain sight for anyone who knew how to look. The quarry, the access road, the cluster of dead trees, it was all woven into the abstract landscape of her painting. She felt a surge of triumphant, terrified hope. It was done. As she was cleaning her brushes, she heard the crunch of gravel. Her blood ran cold. He wasn't supposed to come tonight. She had told him she needed to be alone, to prepare for a gallery showing she had invented as a cover story. He was not listening anymore. He was not asking. He came in without knocking, his face a mask of cold fury. He held a piece of paper in his hand. A shipping manifest. A gallery showing, he said, his voice deceptively calm. In Portland. You were going to leave me, Alara. You were going to take my paintings and run. Someone from the shipping company had talked. Of course they had. His reach was everywhere. The trap had sprung. They're my paintings, Alistair, she said, her voice shaking, but defiant. Everything you are is because of me, he roared, the mask of civility finally shattering. I created you. I own you. He advanced on her, his eyes blazing with a terrifying light. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment she had been dreading. The plot twist didn't come from a dramatic confession or a smoking gun found by the police. It came from a place of quiet, desperate courage. It came from Beatrice Finch. For 22 years, Beatrice had lived in a gilded cage, a silent, terrified witness to her husband's monstrosities. She knew about his fallen angels. She had seen the trinkets he kept from them, a scarf, a bracelet, a single earring hidden in a locked box in his study. She knew about the late-night trips to the quarry. She had lived in a state of suspended terror, medicated into submission. Her own accidental fall down the stairs, a constant, throbbing reminder of the price of defiance. But the news of the reopened investigation into Alara Vance's disappearance had stirred something in her. A flicker of the woman she had been before. Alistair had broken her. She saw Miles Corbin on the news, his tired, determined face, and she felt a sliver of hope. She knew about the painting. Alistair had bragged about it, his prized possession from his hysterical artist. After Elara's disappearance, he had brought the massive triptych, the finale, to their home. It hung in his private study, a place she rarely entered. He called it a monument to female hysteria, a masterpiece of madness that he, in his brilliance, had provoked. He loved to look at it, to gloat over his victory. Beatrice knew it was more than that. She had seen the fear in Alara's eyes. One time, the artist had been foolish enough to call the house, trying to reach Alistair, her voice trembling with a desperate urgency. Beatrice had hung up, her heart pounding, but the memory had stayed with her. Now, with the investigation reopened, she knew she had to do something. Her fear of Alistair was absolute, but her fear of dying as a coward was, for the first time, greater. One evening, while Alistair was at a late-night meeting with his lawyers, a meeting she knew was about containing the new threat of Detective Corbin, Beatrice walked into his study. The room was his sanctuary, panelled in dark wood, smelling of leather and self-importance, and there it was, dominating the far wall. The finale. It was even more terrifying in person, a maelstrom of dark, violent color. It looked like a window into hell. She stood before it, her hands trembling, and forced herself to look. Really look. Alistair had told her it was abstract, meaningless chaos. But Beatrice, in her quiet, lonely life, had become a student of detail. She noticed things. She saw the lines, the strange, deliberate geography hidden in the chaos. A curve that looked like a road, a shape that looked like a body of water. And then she saw it. Tucked into the lower right-hand corner of the third panel, almost completely obscured by a thick smear of black paint, was a series of numbers, scratched into the canvas with the sharp end of a palette knife. They were coordinates. Her breath hitched. This was it. The clue, the confession. The full scope of her husband's evil was not just in the hidden meaning of the painting, but encoded onto its very surface. The stakes shifted in that instant. This was no longer about one missing woman, it was about a tomb. A public scandal that would not just destroy her husband, but obliterate the Finch legacy forever. She took out her small, simple smartphone, a tool her husband dismissed as a toy for her idle hands, and she took a picture. Her hands were shaking so badly, the first few were blurry. She forced herself to be still, to focus. She photographed the entire triptych. Then she zoomed in, capturing the hidden map, the quarry, the road, and finally, the coordinates. She didn't know what to do. If she went to the police, Alistair would find out. He would destroy her before the truth could ever come to light. She thought of the voicemail, which the news had reported on, a ghostly voice from the past. She had to get this information to Detective Corbin, but she had to do it without being traced. She created an anonymous email account at the public library, and then, with her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she sent a single, cryptic email to the Cold Case Division, addressed to Miles Corbin. It contained only the photograph of the coordinates and a single sentence. The finale holds the map. The map leads to the angels. X marks the spot. Miles Corbin received the email at 3:17 a.m. He was in his office. Staring at a wall of dead ends, the 22-year-old case file spread out before him like a shroud. The anonymous email popped up on his screen. He stared at the image of the coordinates, his mind racing. He pulled up a map, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He punched in the numbers. The pin dropped. It wasn't in the water. It was on the land, on the southern rim of the quarry, in a dense patch of woods. In a spot marked by a distinctive cluster of 3 ancient, skeletal dead trees. The same 3 trees Alara had painted into her masterpiece. The full conspiracy slammed into him. The painting wasn't just a map to the quarry. It was a map to a specific grave. Finch hadn't just thrown her in the water. He had buried her. And if Alara's voicemail was to be believed, she wasn't alone. The tension cranked to an unbearable maximum. They had the location. They had the hidden witness in the junkyard, who they were carefully, painstakingly, trying to coax a statement from. They had the voice from the grave. And now, they had the final piece of the map, delivered by a ghost in the machine. It was time to dig. The personal pain of one case was about to become a public spectacle of unimaginable horror. The scandal was no longer a possibility. It was an inevitability, waiting. Just a few feet beneath the earth, the raid was executed at dawn. A cold, grey light was just beginning to seep over the horizon as a convoy of unmarked vans and forensic trucks rolled silently down the access road to the Finch quarry. There was no siren, no flashing light. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the storm that was about to break. Miles Corbin stood at the edge of the woods, the coordinates from the anonymous email glowing on his phone screen. He looked over at Harding, whose face was a grim, pale mask in the pre-dawn light. He could see the state forensic team, their white coveralls like ghosts in the gloom, unloading ground-penetrating radar equipment. "This is it," Harding said, his voice low. "No turning back." "There never was," Miles replied, his eyes fixed on the cluster of 3 skeletal trees that stood like sentinels just inside the woods. X marks the spot. The ground-penetrating radar gave them a hit almost immediately, an anomaly. A disturbance in the earth approximately 6 feet down, large enough for more than one. The digging began. The sound of shovels slicing into the damp soil was the only sound, a rhythmic surgical violation of the 22-year-old silence. Miles watched, his stomach a tight, cold knot. Every shovelful of dirt felt like a second ticking off a clock, bringing them closer to a horror he had only been able to imagine. And then, a shovel struck something. Not a rock. The sound was dull, hollow. A forensic anthropologist, a woman, with a calm, steady presence, knelt down and began to work carefully with a trowel and brushes. The dark, rich earth gave way to reveal a swatch of rotting blue fabric. Then bone, a human ribcage. A collective silent intake of breath rippled through the assembled team. This was Ella. The blue fabric matched the description of the sweater she was wearing the day she disappeared. But as the team carefully, painstakingly excavated the grave, the full, sickening scope of Alistair Finch's evil was unearthed. Elara was not alone. There were other bodies tangled together in a macabre embrace. Skeletons in varying states of decay. Some were decades old. His fallen angels. The final count was 4. 4 missing women from the last 30 years, all unsolved cases, all filed away in dusty boxes in the station's archives, all linked by one common denominator. At some point, their lives had intersected with the world of Judge Alistair Finch. The cinematic payoff did not happen with a gavel strike in a silent courtroom. It happened live, in front of the entire city. Armed with the irrefutable forensic evidence from the mass grave, the DA had moved fast. An arrest warrant was issued for Judge Alistair Finch on multiple counts of kidnapping and murder. But Finch was not a man to be taken quietly in his home. He had been tipped off a leak from inside the police department, a final favor from a man on his payroll. He did not run. He did not hide. He did what he had always done. He controlled the narrative. He called a press conference on the steps of the courthouse, the very symbol of his power and authority. He intended to face the accusations head-on, to paint himself as the victim of a smear campaign, a political witch hunt led by a washed-up, vindictive detective. The media descended like vultures. Cameras from every local and national affiliate were aimed at the podium. The entire city was watching, holding its breath. Finch emerged from the courthouse doors, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, his silver hair shining, his face a mask of weary indignation. He looked every bit the pillar of the community. Wronged by lesser men, he began to speak, his voice the familiar, authoritative baritone that had commanded respect for decades. "For 30 years, I have served this city with honor and integrity," he began, "and now, on the eve of my retirement, I find myself the target of a vicious and baseless attack. A fantasy woven by a desperate and unstable police officer." Miles and Harding stood at the edge of the crowd, watching. Miles felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage. He was twisting it, even now, making himself the victim. But the DA had planned for this. This was not going to be a battle of words. It was going to be an execution. As Finch continued his speech, a large screen, the kind used for outdoor movie nights, was being erected on the courthouse lawn, just behind the press corps. Finch faltered for a moment, distracted by the activity, but then continued, his voice rising with righteous anger, "And then, The screen flickered to life. It was not the DA who appeared on the screen. It was Sam, the junkman. His face was gaunt, his eyes haunted, but for the first time, they were clear. He was sitting in a sterile interview room, speaking directly to a camera. The DA had finally convinced him to give a formal, videotaped statement. "My name is Samuel Jones," he began, his voice raspy but steady. "And I saw him. I saw Judge Finch. The night the artist girl disappeared, I saw him drag her to the edge of the quarry." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Finch froze at the podium, his face ashen. He stared at the screen, his composure finally cracking. But that was just the beginning. The screen changed. Now it showed a woman, frail and bird-like, with haunted eyes that were suddenly filled with a terrifying strength. It was Beatrice Finch. "My husband is a monster," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "He called them his fallen angels. He kept trophies." She held up a small, locked box. "It's all in here. A piece of each of them." Finch stumbled back from the podium, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. The crowd was a wall of noise, shouting, screaming. The flashes of cameras like 1,000 tiny explosions. And then came the final cinematic blow. The screen went black, and a crackle of static filled the air. The sound of the 22-year-old voicemail, "Ilaros, terrified," whisper filled the courthouse square, amplified for the entire world to hear. A map to where he buries his secrets. "My name is Alara Vance, and I'm not the only one." Then came Finch's voice, the calm, chilling baritone, dripping with casual cruelty. "Did you really think a wall could stop me, my dear?" And finally, the scream, Alara's final, desperate scream, cut short by that sickening crunch. It echoed off the granite walls of the courthouse, a sound of pure horror that silenced the entire crowd. In that moment of absolute silence, as the last echo of the scream faded, Miles Corbin began to walk. He pushed his way through the stunned, paralyzed reporters, his eyes locked on the man at the podium. Alistair Finch was broken. His face was a ruin, the mask of power and authority utterly shattered, revealing the pathetic, terrified monster beneath. Miles didn't run. He walked with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had waited 22 years for this moment. He walked up the steps of the courthouse, the symbol of a justice that had been corrupted and was now being reclaimed. He stopped directly in front of Finch, who was trembling, his winter sky eyes wide with disbelief and terror. Miles didn't say a word. He simply held up a pair of handcuffs. The click as he fastened them around the judge's wrists was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a ghost finally being heard. The sound of a 22-year-old debt being paid in full. The public arrest. The live-streamed confrontation. The poetic twist of fate, it all culminated in that one, simple, devastatingly final click. The king had fallen. The finale was over. The aftermath was not a celebration. There were no victory parades, no triumphant headlines for Miles Corbin. The city was in shock, reeling from the revelation that the man they had revered as a symbol of justice was a serial killer. The Finch name, once a source of civic pride, was now a mark of shame, a stain that would never wash away. The courthouse, the law firms, the police department, every institution he had touched, was now under scrutiny, tainted by his corruption. The scandal had not just exposed a man, it had exposed the rot in the foundations of the city itself. Miles retired quietly, a week after Finch's arrest. The trial would be a long, drawn-out affair, but the outcome was certain. The evidence was overwhelming. The video of the press conference had gone viral, played on a loop on every news channel in the country. Alistair Finch would die in prison. Justice, in its cold, procedural way, would be served. But for Miles, there was no sense of victory. Just a profound and weary emptiness. He had solved the case that had haunted him for his entire career, but the ghosts did not leave. They had only multiplied. Now, instead of just Alara, he saw the faces of the other 3 women. Their names and stories resurrected from the cold case files, their families forced to relive their grief in the harsh glare of the public spotlight. He found himself driving out to the old farmhouse one last time. The police tape was gone, but the house felt different. The oppressive waiting silence had been replaced by a deep, settled quiet. A quiet of release. He walked through the rooms, the dust motes still dancing in the sunbeams, and he no longer felt the weight of failure. He felt the echo of a life. Her life. He ended up at the city cemetery. He found the graves of Alara's parents, two simple, weathered stones, side by side. He stood before them for a long time, the wind rustling the leaves of the trees overhead. "I'm sorry it took so long," he whispered, the words swallowed by the air. "But we got him. She's not lost anymore." He had brought something with him. It was a small framed print. After the case was closed, he had used his own money to track down one of Alara's early paintings from an online auction. It wasn't one of her dark, furious masterpieces. It was the one that had first caught the judge's eye. The landscape of a sun-drenched field. But looking at it now, Miles saw what Finch had seen, what Alara had intended. He saw the hint of the storm on the horizon. He saw the darkness and the light warring on the canvas. He saw her. He found her new grave, a fresh plot of earth marked by a simple, temporary plaque, Alara Vance, beloved daughter, artist. There would be a permanent stone later, but for now, this was it. The final quiet resting place she had been denied for 22 years. He knelt down and placed the framed painting against the plaque, leaning it there so that she might, in some way, see it. He didn't stay long. There was nothing more to say. As he walked away, back towards his car, back towards the quiet, empty life that awaited him, he felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. The case was closed. The monster was caged. The ghosts were, if not gone, then at least at rest. But the emotional echo of Alara Vance, of her fire and her art and her final, desperate scream, would linger forever. It was a haunting reminder of the cost of truth, of the darkness that can hide in plain sight, and of the one brave, defiant voice that had refused to be silenced, even by death. The dust had settled. The finale was truly over, and all that was left was the quiet, bittersweet healing of a wound that had finally been allowed to close.